to decide the question of whether or not the town of Westminster should withdraw from the Windham Northeast Elementary School District. I'm sure you all know that. So I live in Westminster West. I'm an elected member of the advisory committee to the school, to the town school, the town on education. And I'll be a moderator and so on. So during this meeting, just to be clear to everybody, no decisions are going to be made during this meeting. This is purely an informational meeting at which we will begin by some presentations from some of the folks who've been proposing the withdrawal, and then open it up to the floor. And I hope that we hear as many opinions or questions as there are out there on the merits for and against the proposals. I want to stress it from the beginning that I'm an undecided voter myself, so I'm as interested as everybody else in hearing what the arguments are for and against. What we have to do is, if somebody wants to ask a question, please, if you could state that fact in the chat room. I will do my best to keep track of who is in queue to ask a question. And if you could just very briefly, in the fewest words possible, describe what your question or point is going to be, so that the chat room doesn't get overwhelmed and I lose track of who's in the track. And then I will call on you, and I hope I will try and call on folks in turn. That may not always happen, so please bear with me, but I will try and make sure that as many voices as possible get heard. We're currently scheduled to go until 8 o'clock, so we'll see if we need that long or if we want to extend, if there's still interest in continuing the discussion. But the current plan, as I say, is to finish at 8 o'clock. Just if I could remind everybody to mute yourselves when you're not actually speaking, just so that we don't get background noises and so on, and I'll do the same. So I will not attempt to summarize the case or the points about this issue at all myself. I'm not the expert in that respect. I will just state, though, the article which is before us, which is this: shall the voters of Westminster approve the withdrawal of the town of Westminster from the Windham Northeast Union Elementary School District? That is the question that will be decided by Australian ballot, simply means a paper ballot, next Tuesday. There is a second article, which is more detailed, has to do with the mechanisms for withdrawal. I'll let David Major describe those mechanisms. He knows much more about it than I do. Elise Manning will also speak, and between them they will speak to the history, how we got here, the mechanisms moving forward, the perceived benefits from an educational point of view of the withdrawal, and the budgetary implications, and also the governance implications of taking this move. Once David and Elise have spoken, they won't speak for very long, then we'll throw it open to the floor. And as I say, if you have a question or an opinion, if you could just let me know that through the chat box, and I will attempt to keep up with those and call on folks. Of course, this is an uncomfortable way of having a meeting, so let's just try and be patient with each other, try and be respectful and polite, let people have their say, but please don't take the floor for too long when you're having your say, so that lots of other people can get a chance. Okay, so I think, Elise, I think you're first up. If you would like to go ahead, and you're going to tell us how we got to this point. Are you there, Elise? Do we know if Elise is here? David, are you here? You're muted, David.
I am here. I see I'm titled as Daniel because I'm on the farm office computer and it happens to be titled Daniel, but I'm right here. Hello, good evening, everyone. Elise should be here, but must be having some kind of technical difficulties. And can you hear me, Charlie?
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, so why don't I begin? She was going to begin, but I've got some notes about what she was going to say, and I'll begin, and hopefully she will when she'll appear and can take over. She was just going to talk a little bit about how we got to where we are, just a quick summary of things, and so I will proceed with that. we were in 2016, the legislature passed Act 46. And that then resulted in which asked towns to merge their districts into multi-town districts. The towns of the Windham Northeast Supervisory Union got together and came up with a proposal for merging. In March of 2017, that went before voters at town meeting time. And Rockingham approved that merger, but Westminster, Athens, and Grafton all voted resoundingly against the merger. Act 46 gave towns who didn't want to merge or attempted to give towns that didn't want to merge an option to develop an alternative governance plan, essentially a way to cooperate without losing control of the schools within their towns. So the towns, all four towns, Rockingham, Westminster, Athens, and Grafton, developed a proposal for cooperation. It's called the Section 9 proposal, or alternative governance proposal. And then at first, in May of 2018, the Secretary of Education, who was Rebecca Holcomb at the time, accepted that proposal, recommended that it would be accepted. But then over the course, she resigned shortly thereafter, and over the course of the summer and fall, the Board of Education essentially decided not to accept our proposal for cooperating amongst the towns, and instead force merger. And they decided that after numerous hearings and many of us going back and forth, on November 30 of 2018. So at that point, they could not force Rockingham to join the merger because Rockingham did not have school choice. It's got its own middle school, but Athens, Grafton, and Westminster were forced to merge despite voting against that. And Rockingham, ironically, even though it voted for merger, was left all by itself. There was then a Supreme Court case that was actually headed by Athens, because it was the first, alphabetically, the first of 30 some odd towns that went into this Supreme Court case. But then by last spring, the Supreme Court, in a split decision, did not find that there was constitutional reasons for denying the mergers. And so that has left since July 1 of 2019. That's resulted in a unified district, the Windham Northeast Unified Elementary School District. And that has been in effect since July of 2019. That leads us to the present. And Elise, are you here yet?
I am here. I am here. Yes.
Great.
Can you hear me?
So that leads us to the present, and which is in this fall, there was a petition circulated around town, which asked the select board to hold a vote about or hold a special town meeting about the possibility of withdrawing from the unified the district, and the 5% of voters signed that petition. The select board accepted it and voted unanimously to have a special town meeting. I sort of say that in quotes because because of COVID, is not actually a town meeting. It's a Australian ballot that will be before the voters a week from today. You talked a little bit about what the articles of that are, but I'll just read them so that that's clear. And also say that if voters in Westminster would like an absentee ballot, you may request it from the town clerk and by calling her up, Pauline, 722-4091. And that's 722-4091. She'll mail it to you. At this point, there's going to be a box outside the town hall, and you can drop it off, drop your ballot off there. Or you can
only do it till tomorrow, David.
I beg your pardon? Yeah, or you can vote in person Tuesday on Tuesday at the town hall. Okay, the articles that we'll be voting on are the first one that Charlie read, which is Article 1, shall the voters of Westminster approve the withdrawal of the town of Westminster from the Windham Northeast Union Elementary School District. And then Article 2 reads, in the event Article 1 is approved, shall the voters of Westminster authorize and instruct the Westminster Select Board to undertake all steps necessary to do the following. 1, form a Westminster Town School District to be responsible for the operation of schools and educational programs for Westminster students. 2, obtain the return to Westminster Town School District of all school buildings and property owned by the town school district prior to the forced merger. 3, appoint 5 town residents to an interim school district board to effect the transition and return of the operation of schools and educational programs to the town school district. And 4, schedule a town election at the next annual town meeting of 2021 to elect 5 town residents to the town school district board with staggered terms as existed prior to the forced merger. So that is what we'll be voting on. Those 2 articles are what we'll be voting on Tuesday or before. Then what happens is if Westminster passes these 2 articles, then the Athens and Grafton have 90 days to vote on the same day to approve that merger or not approve it. I mean that withdrawal or not approve it. If both towns vote to, or put it this way, I believe if if both towns vote to approve the withdrawal of Westminster, then that withdrawal goes before the State Board of Education. Given this law, which is at this point rather an old law for how to dissolve a union district, the State Board of Education has to approve that withdrawal if the schools are found to be within state standards, which they are. So but nevertheless, it has to go before the State Board of Education. And then that would leave Westminster having a town school district, much as it did before, prior to July 1, 2019. And it would leave Athens and Grafton as a unified district, which is somewhat similar to the way they ran their schools prior to July 1, 2019, when they had a joint contract together to run the one school that they share, the Athens Grafton School in Grafton. So that's where we are right now. I think that Elise, you are going to say a few words about how it might, how the different moves might impact the quality of education.
Okay, yeah, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, we were having major technical difficulties, so I missed my whole intro there. So yes, so I guess, but I don't know if you said this, but that Halifax and Reedsboro successfully used this law to withdraw from their forced merger. And that's, what we're following in their footsteps. So one of the big questions is, how will this affect the quality of education if we withdraw from Athens and Grafton and Westminster? And this is open for discussion, but it seems that the quality of education will not be affected because the two schools are basically running the same way as they did before the merger. We have no joint programming. Last year there was, we shared in Studio Y, which was an arts program at the West School. But that was really the only program that they shared, and the children were kind of bussed in separately. So there are no meshing of classes, no joint programming, and that's primarily because of the distance between our two schools. Athens and Grafton are located in the village of Grafton, and that's about half an hour away from Westminster by car. It's about 45 minutes by bus one way. And so that's really a big impediment to having us really as a unified schools. So changing this will not really affect the educational aspects of how this has been going. And at some point, maybe Cheryl might want to
Right.
talk about that also, but
Elise, I was now, I think, going to jump in and talk about or introduce the discussion about budgetary impacts. And we're in the second year at this point of the merged unified district. And at this point, because the schools more or less operate independently, the Westminster Center School develops its budget. The Graf School develops its budget. They're added together. And that is the budget that becomes the unified school district budget. There is, as you said, not much or in the way of any sort of ability to combine programs. We're not having third graders bus to Grafton or fifth graders bus to Westminster, or sharing teachers or that sort of thing. So that the way the budgets are done is one school plus another school. If we vote to withdraw and it becomes Athens and Grafton running the Athens Grafton School and Westminster running the Westminster schools, then it becomes it becomes as it was, and it will not change the budgeting from an expense side. And from the revenue side, the capital side, it becomes sort of subject, how one's tax rate is affected becomes influenced by the state formula that is all school spending is run through to determine what your tax rate is. That's a fairly complicated system, but it essentially, from the Westminster standpoint, it would return it back to the way it was prior to the merger. I think at this point, we'll close by this little sort of introduction of the ideas involved or the issues involved by just talking about the impact of any change on our local democratic or local democracy or local democratic control of the schools. Number one, we're all part of the Windham Northeast Supervisory Union. That won't change. Instead of what it is right now, the unified school district plus the town of Rockingham school district plus the high school district, it would be the Athens and Grafton school district, the Westminster school district, the Rockingham school district, and then the high school district, all part of the Windham Northeast Supervisory Union. What would I think happen, I hope happen, is that we would go back to having more community citizen involvement in the running of the schools. Right now, the unified district is just 2 people from Westminster, 2 people from Athens, and 2 people from Grafton. It was prior to that 5 people from Westminster, 3 people from Grafton, 5 people from 3 people from Athens, 5 people from Grafton, and we would go back to having many more people involved in thinking about and helping to run and make decisions on the behalf of the community for the schools. Plus, the community would be empowered, and I think would help increase community involvement in the schools. We would also go back to having a town district, a town meeting, that a school portion of our town meeting in which we would discuss the schools, make decisions about spending for the schools, and that does not currently happen with the unified district. Instead, there is an annual meeting similar to the high school annual meeting, which is a combination of all towns getting together. It usually results in just a small handful of people attending. Town meetings are much better attended than that, and hopefully it would go back to the way it was, where there are many more townspeople involved in making decisions about the schools. I also think, and I am a proponent of voting to withdraw from the unified district and go back to our town district. It would go back to, through the town meeting process, demonstrating for our children how democracy runs, and how participation in democracy can actually make a difference. That, as I experienced growing up, was really important to me, and I think it's important to many young people growing up in town when they can witness the town getting together and making decisions about the school they attend. So if all this happens, I think we have an agreement that all 4 towns worked on, called the Section 9, or Alternative Governance Proposal, which is sort of a blueprint on how the towns of Rockingham, Westminster, Athens, and Grafton can cooperate. Part of it we began to work on. The most obvious is what was the Westminster Food Service Program prior to Act 46, has now become a supervisory union-wide food program, which is really successful. It's been very, very, very positive thing for the community, for especially during this pandemic time, but before as well. So that concludes, I think,
Let it cook a little bit and I'll be down.
that concludes our presentation about sort of issues related to this. And at this point, I think we're going to open it up for discussion, moderated by you, Charlie.
Cooking?
Thank you. Thank you. If I could just ask folks who are not actually speaking publicly to turn off their, to mute themselves, please. There's several conversations we can hear in the background. So I've had a number of chat suggestions that there are people waiting to get in. Actually, everybody is in, so thank you for alerting me to that. But everybody who wants to is in, and I will keep looking for that, but thank you. Also, we have a question before I throw it up, but a question in the chat from Dan, excuse me, from Dan Davis, asking about the mechanisms for absentee voting. Is it still possible to get an absentee ballot, and when must an absentee ballot be returned to count? Could you speak to that, David, or maybe, or Elise?
Still tomorrow.
I believe it is possible to get an absentee ballot. The town hall is open tomorrow. It is closed on New Year's Eve. So you would have to call the town hall tomorrow at 722-4091. They can send an absentee ballot in the mail. It should get there New Year's Eve or Saturday or Monday or Tuesday. Then you can fill it out. And drop it in a box outside the town hall that's set up outside the town hall. So that, yes, so that is possible.
Thank you. So at this point, there are no further questions on the chat. But so I just want to say I'm going to throw this open. I see Pauline's got a hand up, but I'll come to you in a second, Pauline. Just to remind folks, so if you have a question, perhaps you can direct it to one of the folks who've spoken or to somebody else who you know is an expert. If you have an opinion, that's lovely. I would invite folks not to feel they need to respond to opinions. We can just let them hang out there and everybody can provide their own opinion so that we don't get too much of a debate going here. This is an informational meeting primarily, but let's see how that goes. I will try and keep track of the chat to see if anybody's waiting in line, and so far nobody is. Before I do, though, I did want to just call on Cheryl Charles, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, Cheryl. Since you are the school board member present, is there anything you would like to add to what David and Elise have said before we throw it open to the floor?
Yeah, and I actually am here to respond to questions this evening. Another member of the Unified School Board, Jack Breyer from Grafton, is also here. This really is an informational meeting, and our purpose is to answer questions of any of the voters. I did see that our town clerk had her hand up. Pauline, I think you were about to call on her, Charlie, but I think it would be helpful to hear from her about the absentee ballot question, just to add to what David had already said. Again, I'm happy to respond to questions. I don't have anything additional to comment on at this time.
Thanks,
Cheryl.
Pauline.
I just wanted to let everyone know that we're a little concerned now about mailing the absentee ballots, but through tomorrow we will mail. Just call in to the 722-4091 number, and there's not a box outside. There's a mail slot for tax payments and ballots. There's signage, so it's pretty explanatory. So, but there is a mail slot, so feel free to do it that way. So thank you.
Thanks, Pauline. So I don't see any hands waving or any other questions in the chat room yet. So perhaps I will start off with a naive question of my own, which is that I've been sitting in on the Unified School District's school board meetings for the last 6 months or so, and I've noticed a considerable degree of cooperation between various staff members, the principals, the nurses, some of the teachers, between all the schools in the forcibly merged district or in the Northeast, in the supervisory union. So perhaps Elise or David, could you speak to how will those collaborations that have been forged during this last year be affected or not affected? Will they continue? Will there be any loss, you think, to the function of the supervisory union by us not having joint school board meetings anymore?
You know, from my standpoint, if I could, Elise, just jump in. From my standpoint, one of the positive things that has come about from the whole Act 46 process is the communication between the town's school districts, what was school districts in the Northeast Windham Northeast Supervisory Union. And that sort of stage has been set, I think. And I think that we will continue to, or can continue to work on methods in which the districts can cooperate and you know, utilize resources as best we can between the districts. The food service program is the first case of that happening in a really good and productive way. But the Windham Northeast Supervisory Union will continue to exist and will continue to have it meets once a month or more and continue to have board members from the districts, whatever the districts are, come to that meeting and make decisions together, work on ways in which the districts can be more efficient and be cooperative together.
Hi.
Thank you.
So I'd also like to say that over the last 5 years through this whole process, the different school boards, all 4 of the school boards and the SU have worked really well together, really listening. There's been a lot of hard things to get through, but the boards have really just worked together. And it has been noted, like there's someone that knows a lot about all the different boards and the forced mergers throughout the state. And they said that this was like one of the few places where there was not, there wasn't a lot of contention between large towns and small towns, that it was like one of the prime examples of people working together. So I think we'll just continue to do that.
Thank you. So Michelle Boslan, you have a question about Studio Y.
It's Ron's question, actually.
Yeah,
Oh,
so it's
okay.
a two-part. Yeah, I don't have a strong handle on that. So is the Studio Y, will that, right now, they were saying there'd be no changes. Do all 3 towns participate, and would the AFGRAF kids be excluded?
Who would like to take that?
I can make a stab at it. I think that would be a decision of the boards, and I would like to see the Studio Y program continue for all for the school districts as much as they would like to be involved with it. But it's not. It's something that would be. It's a decision that would be made as time goes on. And even just what happens with the Studio Y program in the coming year is just it's a right now a decision of the Unified District Board. It would become a decision of the Westminster Board with feedback from the Athens and Grafton Board.
So fair enough. It sounds like a moving target, and then budgetarily the same things. Like we were saying, there would be no influence. Is it true then that Westminster already funds that in a way that it wouldn't be affected if Athens and Grafton were not participating?
Well, right now there is no Westminster. So far as the school district is concerned, there is no Athens, there is no Grafton. There's the one pot, in a sense, which is Athens, Grafton, and Westminster all combined. And Studio Y is one of the expenses that comes out of that big pot. If Studio Y were to, if the merger were to succeed and Studio Y were to be continued as it is now, then it would be a budgetary figure in the Westminster budget that would then be something which Athens and Grafton would pay for as an expense in as much as they were involved with the program, I would think.
Thank you, David. Jack Breyer, you said you could perhaps speak to this issue. Can you unmute?
I have to find the unmute button. Sorry. Yeah, Studio Y has come up a couple of times in our discussions. The reality is that the program is physically located in Westminster West. We have heroically, our teachers and our principals have heroically tried to make use of the facility. It's been a bit difficult, to be honest. It was difficult for the AFGRAF folks to make the use of it that they would. Today, it is being paid for by the 3 towns because it's just one district. I would presume that this would fall back into a Westminster only program with budgetary responsibilities accordingly. It's not a particularly expensive program. I think that what we have seen in Studio Y is a model that we have tried to partly emulate on the campus at Grafton with our outdoor oriented programming. And it would be my hope, my expectation that in a Article 9 style governance model, which we have talked about, that these are the types of programs that we would, in fact, be looking to spread across all 4 communities and not just 3 out of 4, because I think the program is valuable and I'd like to see it be part of the curriculum. In the articles of governance that we have for the SU, the supervisory union has a greater say in curriculum than may be generally appreciated. And this is one of those places where I would like us to focus on that. And in future years, I mean, I may not be on the board in future years, but I would still hope that successor folks would do that because I think it's a good program. And that would be the strategy. As far as I say, the financing of it, it's not terribly expensive, but it would be falling to Westminster exclusively in terms of the building and all the rest of it. Hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Jack. So we have questions on the list from Jack Matteau. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. From John Gregg, and also from Tatiana Schreiber. So, Jim Matteau, rather. Jim, do you want to go ahead with your question? You there?
Yeah, I'm now unmuted. Yeah, my question was just administratively, when does this kick in? Would it begin at the start of the next fiscal year and thus the following school year to begin in September, or would there be anything different than that?
Thanks, Jim. Who could take that, David or?
That's a very good question, and one which I think I don't have a real good answer for. I think that if the Athens and Grafton held a vote promptly, we would be able to elect a school board at our upcoming town meeting in late February, I guess it is, I think, early March. And then I presume there would be a little bit of a transition while the school year, which the fiscal year closes out at the end of June and the new one begins at the beginning of July. I assume there'd be a transition at that point. That would be the sensible time to have one body take over from the other body. But there also is the timing issues of that vote, the timing issues of when the State Board of Education actually gets to ratify it all, makes it a little bit fuzzy. So when it actually would happen is it's a good question. I don't think anyone really knows at this point. I do know that the town sort of because the town has to prepare the town meeting warning now, in a sense, is warning a vote of town for the town school board members, so that if it happens in that relatively short order, we can actually take that vote this coming town meeting.
David, just to clarify though, would it be true to say that if deadlines get missed or things get drawn out, that it may be necessary to have another full school year as a merged district?
Great question. I don't know. I would think that would be the sensible thing because trying to do make this transition within a school year becomes, I think, pretty much impossible. But that's what I would assume. But I think it would be left up to the lawyers probably to figure that out.
Charlie?
Is there anybody else briefly on that topic? Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, it's exactly on that topic. This is something I've talked to folks both at the SBE about, and I've been following with some semi-regular correspondence with the folks in Reedsboro and Halifax. Presumably, the vote will happen in next week in in Westminster. We have 90 days to respond with an affirmative up or down vote by the 2 remaining towns in the unified district. I would be hoping to target that for the town meeting day, but the things can break. But that means that we would be voting on a budget for the upcoming year on that date. So we would still be a unified district going into the next school year. During that period, we are unified until the State Board of Education tells us that, yes, we've done it all right, and that they have no discretion, and that they are going to agree that we have taken all the steps and disbanded. I would assume that they would give an order to take effect the following year. That seems to be what's happening in the Reedsboro situation. So I'm assuming that we will be operating as unified district during the course of the coming year. That would be that's at least what John Carroll seems to think. That's the process that I'm assuming we're going to go. That's the process we'll take. We'll see, because you have to remember that the SBE may not agree with our assertion that they are mandated to do this because we are a forcibly unified district, whereas the folks that came before the SBE were voluntarily merged and therefore made a claim that they were governed under the law that was originally intended for union high schools, where members can withdraw, and the state has to accept that. We're going into a bit uncharted territory here, and so far the legislature has been good enough not to muck it up. So I'm saying this for Mike and Leslie's benefit, so that they don't, in the middle of all this, change the rules while we're going through this process.
Thank you, Jack. John Gregg, you've been waiting in line. Why don't you go ahead with your question?
Hi, thanks. I guess I have a question. Why do 3 towns that have less than 5,000 residents in total each need their own school board? I mean, I think, sorry, that's a puppy in the background. I mean, all told, I can't believe we're talking about more than 300 or 400 students K through 8. Do we really need 3 school boards to do this? You know, the main benefit that David seemed to talk about is sort of promoting lessons in democracy and stuff, seeing people vote on their school budget. But I mean, we're still going to have a floor meeting for town meeting for the municipal side. So that seems like a pretty good lesson. And then finally, and I guess most critically, how would a Westminster school board on its own capitalize on initiatives that would probably get better funding from the state if it involved more schools, like a shared language teacher and that sort of thing? Thanks.
John, would you like a response, or was it are you just putting that out as an opinion?
No, those are questions.
Okay, good. Okay, so anybody want to take those? Who's going to take them?
Oh,
David, you're muted, David.
there. Okay. Hi, John. I'd be happy to at least sort of help think that out a little bit. In some ways, the more adults involved in the schools and the running of the schools, the more adults involved in the better for the kids, whether it's 5 kids or 50 kids or 500 kids. The more community participation, the more empowered the community in the running of the schools, the better it is for the kids, I believe. I also think that, and you know, when you actually go to town meeting, or when you went to town meeting prior to the forced merger, the schools were heavily involved because a number of the school officials and teachers and school board members and so on had to be present. So there often is daycare happening there. There are more kids there. When town meeting does not involve the schools, when that third or greater than third of the town meeting role is taken away, it takes away from the involvement of that younger portion of the community in town meeting often. Or I believe it does. And so I also am a big proponent of town meeting. The more town meeting can do, the more people are involved. The stronger the institution, the better, I think, for the community in the long run. Finally, in terms of capitalizing on initiatives from the state, that I think is what we tried to do, and I think we'll continue trying to do through the Alternative Governance Act, sort of Section 9 cooperation of all 4 towns, not just Athens, Grafton, and Westminster, but Rockingham included, which is by far the biggest town in our district or in our supervisory union. So, my judgment lies in favor of having town control over the schools because of these reasons.
This seems to be an issue that's pretty central to this whole debate, this question of local control. I wonder if there's anybody else out there who hasn't spoken yet who would like to speak one way or another to this issue. Is it worth it? Why are we doing this? I can't see everybody, so if anybody just wants to jump in, that'd be great. Nobody? I would like to come back to a point that Jack made, and I think Dan Axtell might be speaking to the same issue, which is whether or not the law that we have been told is the under which it may be possible for us to demerge, in fact, applies to this case. So Dan, was that your point? And then I'm going to come back to Tatiana afterwards. But Dan, did you want to speak to that point? Go ahead.
I think Dan said yes, so.
He did, but go ahead, Dan, if you can hear me. I can't hear you. Are you muted, baby?
He's a techno quiz.
Yes.
Go ahead. I don't see you, Dan, and I can't hear you. Are you speaking?
I said what I had to say.
When did you, I didn't hear you. Would you mind repeating it?
If Charlie, maybe you can read his statement.
Oh, would you like me to read it for you, Dan? I can do that. Yes, sorry.
Oh, yeah, yes, please.
Okay, so Dan says, Title 16, Section 724 applies to, quote, a school district that voted to form a unified union school district may vote to withdraw, unquote. Westminster did not vote to form a unified school district, unlike Reedsborough and Halifax. Why would the State Board of Education recognize this vote? Now, it may or may not be that there's anybody qualified to opine on why they would or wouldn't, but it clearly is a question that's out there that they may or they may not. Does anybody have any wisdom on this?
I can be helpful. There are 2 provisions in state law. One deals with voluntary mergers. The other just deals with merged districts. They're actually different. They're different provisions. One's, I think, 121, and the other's either 124 or 126. I can't remember which, but the difference is important because that difference indicates that districts that were unified can, by fiat, could at least theoretically withdraw. We are, as I say, in somewhat untested water, but this is supposed to apply to unified, like unified high schools, many of which were formed by the state. Towns weren't really given an option back in the day. You were part of a union high school district and you could fight your way out. And the only reason I know any of this is because there was a stretch when Grafton annually wanted to get out of the Union High School, and we researched this in some degree, and the barrier was not that the SBE was going to turn us down necessarily, but was that the other members of the Union High School district would have to vote to allow us to get out. And that never seemed like it was a possibility because Rockingham was very clear they weren't interested in such a thing. So here the situation would be that Westminster would like to withdraw, and they are going to have to get the permission of Athens and Grafton to withdraw. And since Athens and Grafton never wanted to be part of a unified district, I think the chances of that are a lot higher, assuming everything else being more or less equal. So that's the answer as best we have it. It is quite possible that this will be disputed. Donna Russo Savage and Dan French have both said that this is a legal gray area, even from their perspective. So they don't think it's cut and dried that we can't do it. We'll have to find out when we go before the SBE, or when you go before the SBE.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that point before we move on? Tatiana is waiting in line.
Yes, I'll speak. That question I put in the chat was just a process question. I probably know the answer, but I just wanted a clarification on the process, the vote. So the vote is a simple majority that we do on the 5th. And then my understanding, Grafton and Athens each of them have to decide when they're going to have a vote. And then they have to vote also to withdraw. And then, so my question is that correct? And those are both also simple majorities. And if Westminster votes to withdraw, what would be the process of trying to persuade the Athens and Grafton voters to do the same? I just heard Jack say that he thinks they would anyway, but maybe they wouldn't. So obviously that needs to happen. So, yeah. And then I have one other question after. Okay.
Tatiana, let me just walk you through again the process as best I understand it, and I've gone through this a couple times, so I'm hoping I've got this accurately. You'll have your vote in January 5th. Like any other vote, like if you were having a budget vote, there is a 30-day window where the vote could be appealed and they can make a revote. I'm not really expecting that to happen, but it's at least theoretically possible. It's a good reason to have a robust turnout on the 5th, by the way, because you don't want that to be the reason that it's challenged. At that point, it is our expectation that the town advisory commissions of Athens and Grafton will have meetings very similar to this one. And we'll walk through the fiscal implications. We've already given instructions to the SU business manager for Pagan to start that process. We have tried to support that by having model budgets broken out by a Westminster separate district and by an Athens Grafton joint district. Essentially, it would be Athens and Grafton would still be the Windham Northeast Unified Elementary School District, unless they change the name. You're simply withdrawing from it. But so the process would be vote, hopefully no appeal. We get a certification from the state that you have had a valid legal vote. There would then be a information gathering period that I think would be fairly short and sweet because we've got most of that information already. Would be presented to the two towns by their advisory commissions. The board of the school board would assist technically in the process. Those two would have their votes. The target for that is town meeting day. We'll see how that works. Both towns have to vote by majority in the affirmative. Again, like any other vote in the state of Vermont, those can be appealed, but we're assuming that they will go through. And at that point, you go to the State Board of Education, and they do what they do. It took the folks in Reedsboro a full year to go through the whole process. I'm hoping it won't take us that long, but anybody that expects this to be fast and decisive is probably in for a world of disappointment. But we wanted to get the process started.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Tatiana?
Yeah, pretty much. I just want to quick follow-up and then just more of a substance question around the local control. The follow-up is just obviously to make this work, then they both Athens and Grafton both have to vote in the affirmative. So to make it, not a waste of all this time and effort, I'm just wondering what the process, if people who are pushing this, decision have a process for making sure that the Grafton and Athens do vote in the affirmative, because otherwise it would all be for naught. And then my other question is back to the local control is, so if we did go back to having separate school boards, how would that affect such things as the maintenance of the school buildings and the decisions around, say, a school wants to spend money on upgrading a building? How would it affect that?
Sounds like a question for you, David.
Okay. Let's see. So far as lobbying Athens and Grafton to support the withdrawal of Westminster, we're actually here right now in part because Athens and Grafton have been pushing us to come on, Westminster, get with it. Halifax and Reedsboro just did this return to their town school districts. Why don't you hold a vote? So there's been some pressure from the Athens and Grafton direction towards Westminster. I think that I would be happy, and I'm sure some other Westminster residents would be happy to attend any informational meeting or talk to the advisory boards in Athens and Grafton. But I mostly think it's up to Athens and Grafton to decide whether they were better off as a single district of the two towns than they are with Westminster. By and large, I think community sentiment is that they would be better off to be the way they were, or something similar to it when they used to have a joint contract. But much will depend on the budgetary implications, and that's a process that Athens and Grafton, I think, need to go through to figure that out. I'm losing what second
maintenance
question.
of the buildings. That was my second thing.
That would go back to the way it was, which is that if it would be the responsibility of the Westminster town school district and the voters of Westminster to decide whether to fund a repaving of the parking lot or whatever it might be, build a new classroom or whatever the issue is at the time. Right now, that is a decision of the unified board, but it would return to a decision by the town school district.
Thank you. Sarah Waldo has a question. Should I just read it for you, Sarah, or would you like to ask it yourself? Okay, so Sarah
Yeah,
asks.
read it. Go
Okay,
ahead.
Sarah asks, will the vote to withdraw require a certain percentage of Westminster registered voters? This may speak to Jack's point about the challenges and so on. Does anybody know whether there is a minimum percentage of voters required to carry a vote like this?
I think it's just this is David again. I think it's just a simple majority vote of those who vote on Tuesday or before. I don't think there's any other criteria besides that. Now, obviously, I think Jack's point is valid. If three people vote to withdraw and 2 don't, that becomes a something which might be open to a challenge. But the decision is by the people who go to the voting booth.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There are no further questions in the chat. Is there anybody else waiting to get in who hasn't spoken yet?
I'll pipe in if I can, Charlie. This is Peter Stam. Can you hear me?
Yep, I think Peter.
I think I had to switch over to my iPhone, so I think I may be off screen. But at any rate, I wanted to just briefly touch on John's points, which I think cut to the quick of the matter in many ways. From my perspective, I think that, as David said, there doesn't seem to be any question that participation by the members of the town has diminished since we have merged, and that we were much more active and much more vital. You know, whether it's 150 students in Westminster or 300 inhabitants, it's still a matter of 100% of our township. And I think it's important that we all participate. And it's been diminished because of the fact that now we are 1/3 of a group. Furthermore, I think that, you know, he talked also about, you know, having the possibility of further services such as language and that sort of thing. That's really a matter for the town to decide on if we act independently, just as we did with Studio Y, which was a very controversial and still is a hot subject, but it's something that the town has decided they want to support. If the town wants to support language or science, that I think they need to do that as well. But and then finally, the point about, you know, the democratic process. Certainly students that may come to the town meetings, which has also diminished, as David pointed out, can view the process if that's in fact, you know, their intent. But really, I believe that with the school budget being, I believe, something along the lines of 80% of the town budget, taking that out of the hands of the citizens has really eviscerated town government. And to me, that's one of the biggest travesties of this whole process. Even though it runs around education, it really has changed what Vermont has held dear to itself for so long and has been fiercely independent about for so many years, and one of the last states to have such a body. So those are just a few points, but I think the bottom line is participation by the members of the town. And without having an active school board of 5 members or however many members, we just don't have that. Each one of those people addresses and affects somebody else. Now we have 2 members. I'm in touch with Cheryl pretty actively, but it just is not the same. And my interest in town meeting and town government has diminished dramatically. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I think somebody else is in line. Who is this? Who's that? So Tatiana, is this a new message? Should I read it for you? So Tatiana says, so it seems to me that if Westminster regains control of the school buildings and grounds, we will have more ability to maintain these in the way we choose. If we choose, for example, to promote edible landscaping, gardening, etc., we'd have more ability to do that than with a larger school board with local leadership. This is an opinion, not a question. No response needed. So I think Tatiana is saying is pitching for local control in that respect. That being said, so I hear strong opinions about local control. Haven't heard a great deal in this discussion about educational quality. At least you did speak to that a little bit, but I do remember that at the time of the original merger, forcing of the merger, there was discussion of kids having to spend long times in school buses, and on the one hand, and also the possibility of shared resources, language teachers, specialists, and so on. So there would be pros and cons of being merged. Did any of that pan out? Did we, in fact, lose or gain anything educationally from being in a merged district? I wonder who would speak to that. just for specifically educationally, not the town's governance,
Sure.
just the education of the community.
Charlie?
Well, I wonder if anybody in Westminster has a feeling about how it went down in Westminster.
Cheryl, do you have something to say on this subject?
Oh, I'm happy to. I think one of the things that still happens in reality is that there's a tremendous amount of leadership from the school principals, and the teachers on site at each of the buildings. And so, whereas the curriculum overall is heavily defined through the supervisory union and in turn informed and guided by the state, it's still up to the imagination and the dedication and the professionalism of the teachers at the local level to implement their best approaches, their most effective ways of teaching the children in their care. And whereas the board discusses and learns about and supports those things that are going on, I still want to say with this question about educational quality, that has remained throughout this process. And it really is a testimony, again, to the talent and the dedication of the teachers at the local level. But I'd reinforce that the wider community misses the opportunity to learn as much about all of that when those stories are not brought to town meeting as they have been in the past, when it's really, Athens and Grafton talking about what's going on in their building there and what's going on in the Westminster building or buildings here. So have I seen any change in educational quality? No. Is there a lot of collaboration and cooperation, not just between the two principals in our unified district, the principal in Grafton, Athens, and the principal in Westminster, but even from where we stand as a unified board, we're trying to do as much as possible as was intended through the alternative governance structure. That is, we're trying to get all the principals, in this case specifically at the elementary level, to talk even more and share ideas. We do that through the supervisory union, and those kinds of things will continue. From the point of view of the quality of education the children are receiving, there will not be a big difference whether it's the independent Westminster, Athens, and Grafton, or whether we're still an emerged situation. That's based on my observation, at least.
Thank you, Cheryl. Jack, were you wanting to speak to the same point, Jack? Jack Breyer?
Yeah. Hold on, my phone is dying, so this may be briefer than I intended. The reality is we try to do a lot of merging, partly for financial reasons, partly for consistency reasons. We did try to work with have a single principal, but the geography of the matter made that difficult. We tried to find ways to merge our arts programs, but again, the geography of carting teachers back and forth 45 minutes between schools made it impossible. This is the John Gregg question too. Why do we need two? We don't need three boards, but we do need two, because the reality is that we've got one board running what is effectively two different school districts, and it just seems a little bit silly to be doing that. If there were any roads in common, if there were any natural connections between the communities, this would be an entirely different discussion, but there just aren't. And there are no ways to make this system more efficient. There's no way to make the quality of educational opportunity cleaner than it is presently, simply because physically you've got a school of about 60 kids in one location, a school of a couple hundred in another location. We have communities that probably don't know each other as well as they might because of the physical distances. And it's just hard to create a rational governance system that takes into account those communities. And it's that reason, as much as any, was the reason we objected to the whole thing in the first place, the whole merger thing.
I could add as well that for townspeople, the budget that they vote on in the unified district is a budget that is a school that they know. If you're a resident of Westminster, you know the Westminster Center School. Maybe your kids are there or have been there, or your grandkids, or you are likely to have some familiarity with it. The budget is that school added to the budget of the Athens and Grafton School, which in all likelihood you have never been to, you don't even know where it is. The same is true for people who live in Athens and Grafton. They just have very little familiarity, if any, with the Westminster Center School. So when we look at the budget that has this school we know plus an entity that we don't know, or vice versa, we're in a sense not making the budget more transparent, as was the objective, one of the objectives of Act 46. We're making it more harder to read because it's mixing figures from schools that are essentially independent just because they are so far apart.
Thank you. Charlotte Gifford's been waiting in line, and then John Gregg, I think, has a follow-up. So Charlotte, why don't you go first? Are you there, Charlotte?
My question's in the chat. I'm happy to hear the answer.
Shall I read it for you then? Okay, so it says, what is the position of our teaching professionals and staff and their union on this whole question? Does anybody have a lead on the opinion of the teachers and staff on this question?
This is Cheryl. Jack, I'll go ahead and respond, and Jack, you can weigh in if you want to. The issue, to my knowledge, has not been brought to the teachers or the union. I think what I'd like to reinforce is that the school-related decisions, I said a little bit of this earlier, having to do with the teachers and the principal at the local level in the building. There's a leadership team for the Westminster School that really focuses on what's going on there with the children every day. Similarly, there's a leadership team in Athens and Grafton with the principal, and they make the decisions about what's going on day in, day out. This withdrawal, if it goes through, would not affect that instructional model or that leadership model. There's not any impact that I'm aware of that would raise a concern in any direction about that. It doesn't affect the day-to-day lives of the teachers in either building or the administration in either building, to my knowledge. Jack,
Charlie,
you want to add to what I said?
Sure.
Charlie, could I follow up, please?
Sure,
Charlotte,
Charlotte,
is that Charlotte or who's speaking?
Yes, it's Charlotte here. Could I please follow up?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm simply stunned that there hasn't been discussion between the board and the union. It undermines. I should have said first, I am a union member of an educational union as well. I belong to the same union as all of my colleagues in the Westminster school system and in our wider supervisory union. It undermines your argument that this is for educational quality if you have not had the discussion with the instructors and the staff.
That's not the same thing, Charlotte. You're conflating a couple things. I'm going to give you an answer that actually partly supports your point and partly doesn't. The part that supports your point is we have urged our two principals to jointly report principals' reports together. And they like each other quite a bit. And people will be aware that the current Westminster school principal, it was the former Athens Grafton school principal. And I was very happy about that. And I thought it was important, if only to help coordinate a common education program. I think it was a useful thing. That kind of supports your point. What doesn't support your point is the idea that somehow we have not, that the union speaks for their members on educational issues or on this specific issue. They do not. It's they are wages and working conditions. There will be no, and nothing else. And you know that if you're a member. And you'll also be aware that the union doesn't want to be talking to us right now because we asked for them to adhere to their contract, which says that they'll negotiate in a collaborative fashion, and they don't want to adhere to that part and have refused to meet with us. That is nothing, absolutely zero, to do with whether or not they have an opinion on a merger or non-merger. Most of them that I've talked to, and I've talked to I think close to the majority of them, have said to me that they view the issue as a governance issue. If there's any effect on them, it eliminates the issue of whether or not we're going to try to force sharing an art teacher or a music teacher. Outside of that, it's really not been a thing. Most of our teachers were with us before the merger. They'll be with us after the merger. They know the way things were run when there were two separate boards, and they know the way things are run with one. And I don't think that most of them could tell the difference.
Jack, could I interrupt you a second? Could I, Richard's iPad?
Sure can. I'm done anyway.
Okay, Richard's iPad have would you mute yourself, please? We can hear a conversation in the background. Not sure who that is, Richard's iPad, but okay. So Charlotte, you've asked on line if you'd like to follow up. I'm not sure if, would you like to follow up another time, or have you already?
Yes, please. I think,
go ahead.
Jack, I just have to say that you misunderstand the union movement if you think that the changes involved in a merger or unmerger do not involve working conditions or the professional practice of the people involved. It absolutely does.
One of my cousins was one of the founders of the NEA, so I got a kind of good idea. But that's a discussion we can take offline.
Maybe we should table this one. I may be out of line here, but I wonder if there would even be a mechanism for talking to the union, since this is a citizen petition to the select board to propose a withdrawal. I don't even know what would be a mechanism anyway, even if it were desirable, or were it desirable, to address the unions on this issue. Since this is not being originated by the school board itself.
We would certainly invite in our informational meetings members of our teaching community to pitch in with points. I'm expecting that our advisory committees will be talking to members of the teaching community. I will be inviting them to our meetings, including any members of the Westminster teaching community that wants to add their 2 cents when we have identical meetings to this one. So that's as far as I can take it, Charlie. We'll do that.
Thank you so much. Mike Mawicki, you'd like to get in. Do you want to jump in? Mike?
Sure, thank you. And I just wanted to share quickly that your local legislators are paying attention to this. And I know, just speaking for myself, I certainly support what you're trying to do here. And we're trying to make this happen or not get in the way for anything legislatively, which is why I passed along the suggestion to have this vote as soon as possible, because I know the governor, through his Secretary of Education, wants to close these doors. And Dan French is somebody that I watch very closely with what he does. And I would also say that I had a conversation today with Representative Heidi Sherman of Stowe, who was somebody I worked with when we tried to push back on Act 46. And she's ready to put a bill forward that would allow these kinds of process votes to go through without having to have the full process that's happening now, where there's too many areas where it can short circuit. That bill is just being drafted now, and when there's details, I'd be glad to share it with you. But we are trying to make sure that the agency of education doesn't try and short circuit this or put other roadblocks into really what's the will of the people. So stay tuned.
Thank you, Mike. John Gregg, you got lost in the shuffle, I'm afraid. Do you want to come back with another point?
Sure. Just a couple things to Mike Maricki's point. I guess I'd point out that Peter Shumlin, who grew up in Westminster West and Putney, signed Act 46 and pushed it through. I guess I never got an answer to my question about how many students K through 8 are we talking about in these 3 towns, and to Cheryl's point about the roads and stuff. I understand that they're different towns, but there are lots of very large school districts that are county-wide. I mean, and these are two towns that aren't very far apart. And then to Peter Stam's point about participation, and this goes to my question about how many students are we talking about? I mean, is some of the diminishment in adult participation a factor of regrettably declining enrollment?
Who'd like to take that? David?
Sure. Right now, and Cheryl and Jack, you could help me out with this, but I believe the Athens Grafton School has about 60 kids. The Westminster School is somewhere in the neighborhood of 170, somewhere in there, 160, 170.
200 was what I have, but yeah, in that neighborhood.
Yeah, and the number of kids in town has actually been going up, but because of COVID, the number of homeschooled kids has been going up drastically, and that has resulted in in some kids being drawn out of or not attending the public schools. There also, of course, because of COVID, that throws a question mark into how much participation there is from the part of the community in the schools. So much of what you are asking, John, I think is we don't really know right now because of this uncertainty or change of how we usually operate as a result of the pandemic. Overall, I know at least in Westminster, but I think it may, and I don't know about Athens or Grafton, but in recent months, the population and the student and the school population, or the school age kid population, has gone up. But that hasn't necessarily meant an increase in the number of kids going to the public school.
How's that, John? Okay, so comment from Mike Mawicki. With due respect to Peter Shumlin, his perspective on public education is secondhand, since he and his children went through private schools with no direct experience with the public schools. And then Betsy Williams, would you like me to read, or would you like to speak your thoughts? Betsy.
Either way, doesn't really matter to me.
Why don't you say them, since they're fairly long? You'll say them better than I will.
Sure. I'm just somebody who likes to hear multiple sides of an argument, and I think we're hearing a lot about what the advantages seem to be to return to what we had before. And I think the arguments I'm hearing so far seem to be primarily centered around having more local control and more community involvement, because the whole school budget and what we choose to fund and focus on in our local school can be decided by the local community. And I'm not hearing anything about what the advantages might be, or what somebody would perceive to be the advantages of remaining merged. So I'm trying to kind of get a balance of what we're gaining and losing each way. So if somebody could speak to that, I would appreciate that.
throw it out to the floor. Who would like to speak for the status quo, remaining the way we are?
This is Cheryl. I'll make a comment, and then I certainly encourage others to add in. When we first looked at the feasibility of a merger and really tried in earnest to see how to implement the intended goals of Act 46, which did include equity issues and efficiencies and transparency, some of the things that have been stated tonight, we did very thoughtful and thorough study of that, and we could not find in particular any great benefits. That was the larger question of whether all of the towns would merge. In this case, as we've looked at in recent times with Athens, Grafton, and Westminster being a merged district, we have seen no appreciable efficiencies or cost savings as a result of this. There really have not been any advantages fulfilled consistent with the purposes of the law that at least I can see as a board member. And I'd be, again, happy to have others comment on that. One case in point this year, as an example of what might have been, there was a possibility of having one principal for the two buildings for Westminster and then Athens and Grafton. And after a lot of deliberation, looking at that scenario from a variety of directions, finally the administration recommended against one principal, but really did encourage us to keep two. And the board did make that recommendation. That's reflected in the budget. That's an example of what might have seemed like an easy place to make to achieve some savings, and we were not able to do so.
Thank you. Jack, there's a note. Were you volunteering to speak to this issue, to speak against the motion?
I will, only because I don't think anybody else is going to on your board. And I think that the arguments for status quo are kind of weak sauce, but I'll give them to you. They really are about fiscal stability. We are small communities, though quite frankly, Athens and Grafton don't make the Westminster, Athens and Grafton aren't a whole lot bigger than just Westminster on itself. So the benefit of that stability is more for Athens and Grafton than it is for Westminster. The issues are that that we see increasingly iffy funding from the state for local education. Therefore, you don't have the kind of buffering that the state used to provide. The small schools grant that we used to have, particularly for Athens and Grafton, is effectively not a thing anymore. Something that I'm hoping both Mike and Leslie are going to help us fix is the Act 173, which is changing special ed to a block grant, and will really mean that local communities, particularly poor local communities and smaller local communities, will absorb vastly larger share of special ed costs. And if you're a small district, you're going to feel that variation much more than you would otherwise. But those types of issues really aren't solved by an Athens, Grafton, Westminster merger. They might be solved by a county-wide merger, but not by something as weak sauce as our three little towns smashed together, particularly when we're talking about towns the size of Athens and Grafton. That's an issue, but I think that the better solution to that is to fix Act 173 and to restore the small schools grant, and not to try to fiddle around and try to make what is a dysfunctional decision by the legislature work, because it won't. Those decisions were as bad as Act 46, and they need to be fixed. And that's the solution. It's not to continue the district in one piece the way it is right now. That's as good as I've got, Charlie, but that's really that's the big one.
Okay. Well, it's coming up on 8 o'clock. In fact, it may be 8 o'clock.
It is.
We are scheduled to end now. I don't want to close the floor if there are folks out there who still would like to pitch in. So is there anybody else who hasn't spoken who would like to either ask a question finally or just give an opinion?
This is Elise. I did want to say that to John's point about the number of students, that so much work went into the alternative governance structure that we put together, and that included Rockingham. And with all those 4 towns, those 4 schools, we had over 900 students. And we wanted to work together for the 4 schools, and that would have worked well. But the state decided to just put the Athens, Grafton, and Westminster together, which doesn't work well. I have to say that I know that the school board has been working very hard, but there are a lot of differences between our 2 towns, and they've been holding things together. But I think down the road, the differences between the sizes of our schools and a lot of other situations, there's going to be a lot more problems. And I think that they've been holding it together very well, but it doesn't work well, just the 3 towns.
Thank you. I'd just like to note that Michelle Boslan is on this call. Michelle is our new representative-elect and is, I believe, supportive of this issue. Would you like to speak to the issue at all, Michelle?
I support Westminster withdrawing. I think the case has been made this evening. Thanks.
Okay. Last chance. Any final comments or thoughts?
Hi, it's David again. I just want to urge everybody, regardless of whether you support withdrawing and recreating the town district or not, to vote and to spread the word about the vote to your neighbors and other members in the community. Thank you.
And I'd like to pipe in, Charlie, that I think from a positive side, what this has done has brought these towns together to broaden discussion and to share our experiences, because we are both small towns. And the only negative side I can see is Westminster will be losing Jack.
He's just around the corner.
Don't know if that's that big a loss, guys, but nonetheless, thank you.
Well, with that, I would like to thank everybody for participating. I think this has been a robust and a polite conversation, and I think very informative. As David said, the vote is next Tuesday. Get your absentee ballot right away if you can. Otherwise, come to the polls on Tuesday, and we'll take it from there. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.